An incredibly wide remit. He's also a...
Thank you very much. Well, look, thank you very much indeed for having me, and I know that this is being streamed out as well, so a huge audience. The great thing about television, if you've ever done it, is that you can't actually see who's watching, so this is all slightly scary when you actually see people looking back at you. Normally you'd sort of stare at a camera. So actually seeing you all sitting here is slightly disconcerting, but I will crack on. I know that the real reason that you're all here is in the hope that some of the employed journalists that are standing up in front of you during the course of your journalism week will offer you some clues, some secrets on how to get a job. Well, I'm afraid I'm going to be a huge disappointment to you because, you see, I've never actually applied for a job in my entire life. My career has been a skydive, a bit like one of those theme park rides where they buckle you up and you get jostled around. There's lots of thrills and spills on the way, but effectively you're just a passive passenger. And that's really been the story of my journalistic career. My local paper, the Southern Evening Echo in Southampton, offered me a job on the basis actually of a sort of polemical feature that I wrote about the need for skateboard parks when I was on work experience, fresh from school. It ended, I recall, with a warning to the local council that that the kids were going to skateboard whether they liked it or not, and if they didn't provide those parks, kids were going to die. So that was the reason why I got a job on the Southern Evening Echo. I decided to go pretty much straight from school. I did a pre-entry course at a local technical college. I didn't go to university on the basis that I knew what I wanted to do, so why faff about? And in those days, that was kind of okay. I'd known since I was 13 years old that I was going to be a journalist. It was at that point that I played and won a game of Waddington's Scoop while on holiday in West Wittering with my family. Scoop, for those who are not familiar with it, is an absolutely fantastic board. I don't think they still sell it, actually, very sadly, but it was a fantastic game. Basically, you were given the front page of a newspaper, and you had to fill it with stories worth different points, okay? And the first person to fill their front page won the game. And to fill it, you had this cardboard telephone with a sort of handle that went back and forth like that, and a little kind of window. So if you can imagine, inside the telephone there's a sort of circle turning with each move, and it's sort of a random system. So upward calm, a crime story, you'd be able to collect a crime story, put it on the front page, a 2-star showbiz exclusive, you put that on, general news story, and so on. However, the real excitement was that with your pulling of the handle, you might get a scoop. Or, indeed, reflecting the dog-eat-dog world of Fleet Street as it was, you might equally get fired. So it was a terrifically realistic game. There was, as far as I remember, no opportunity to hack into the cardboard phone and get your stories that way, or indeed an opportunity to bribe some public official to get round the business of having to get the phone at all. But nevertheless, this particular board game appealed to me so much that I decided at that moment that that's what I was going to do with my life, age 13. And although my views about journalism have changed a little over the years, essentially I've always been attracted to, well, I think that the privileged status of a reporter, standing back from daily life, chronicling, examining, analysing, criticising, holding to account the society around them. So given that my own career is, frankly, utterly crap as a model of how to get a job in journalism, I thought we might consider a different question, if that's all right with you, which is why? Why do you want to be a journalist? Let me ask you now, who here has got a coherent reason for wanting to be a journalist? Hands up. That's good. Like, you've really trained them well. Now, someone here must have a coherent reason for wanting to be a journalist. You've all gone on the course. Someone, there must be, gentleman there, right, now, but apparently you have to wait for the microphone, but we're going to sort of collect a few of these thoughts as to why, journalism is the must-have. Is there a microphone that comes across?
Yes.
Where's the man with the microphone? He's gone to sleep in a cupboard. Okay, well, as long as it's great to know. It's great to know that this session's going so well that the. Oh, there we are. Excellent. No. Okay, so yeah, have a think. While this brave chap is saying why he wants to be a journalist, perhaps a few more of you, if you haven't already, before you embarked on this course, thought why you might want to be a journalist, now would be a good opportunity, I think, maybe take a couple more thoughts. Yeah, so what's your reason?
Basically, I quite like the idea of being in a position where you hold those in power to account.
Yeah.
I think it's a basic
Bossing,
need
that's
of
good,
any
yeah.
functioning democracy.
So you definitely see it as a sort of important part of the sort of democratic system and a key and responsible role.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Gentlemen, I think behind you, yeah?
Yeah, it's basically the same, but to uncover the truth.
Uncover the truth. Yep, I like that. Anyone else? Anyone doing it for money?
I want to work in the field of sport, and obviously I can't physically participate in sport itself, so to report on it was the next best option.
Okay, very good thoughts. Gentlemen, was there someone on the front here? Was it you, Sue? Oh, you were just saying it was money. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else got any thoughts? All very, I would say, very. You all have wonderful principles. I think that's excellent. So, this is as Mike was suggesting, this is a big week for me. On Thursday, this coming Thursday, my first book is going to be published. Now, this is obviously me using this as an opportunity to try and flog a few books, but anyway, I will carry on. It's entitled Britain, etc., and it is an alphabetical journey to understand my country. So the idea of the book is to wander off the familiar path of news and current affairs, and to try and look at my country's relationship with a whole load of other things that I wouldn't normally think about looking at. I certainly wouldn't in the course of my day job. So there's a whole chapter here about our relationship with toilets, and with grass, and root vegetables, and silly hats, and swearing, and dogs. But inevitably, there is also quite a lot of stuff in here about journalists and journalism. A is for alcohol. So, I'm going to read a little bit of my book, which will just give you, it's sort of like a warning, really, about the profession that you appear to have chosen. So, A is for alcohol. Okay. When I first arrived in Fleet Street in the early 1980s as a starry-eyed young radio journalist, my initiation began with a colleague leading me to the pub. It was barely opening time as we walked into the King and Keys. There, amid the smoky gloom, I was introduced to one of the newspaper world's most celebrated figures, the editor of the Daily Telegraph, Bill Deeds. The great man sized me up. "You will have a malt whiskey, dear boy," he said. I started to splutter something about how it was only 11 in the morning, but he quickly closed the discussion by adding, "a large one." It would be years before I fully understood the gesture. I was being blooded for an industry where alcohol was as much a part of the process as ink and paper. In those days, every Fleet Street title had its pub. The Telegraph occupied the King and Keys, the now defunct News of the World drank at the Tipperary, the Tip, the Daily Express at the Poppins, the Popinjay, the Mirror was the stab in the back. Drinking was ritual and tribal. Tales of drunken fights and indiscretions were sewn into the colourful tapestry of Grub Street legend. Inebriated misadventures to be reverentially recounted and embellished. Pickled hacks could be found propping up many of the bars, victims treated with the respect of war veterans. Newspaper people drank around the clock. Magistrates had been persuaded to adjust local licensing hours so that city workers could enjoy a glass or two of ale at any time of the day or night. The social wreckage from alcohol was strewn all over Fleet Street. Broken marriages, stunted careers, and inflamed livers. It's just a hint of chapter 1. A is for alcohol. That world, you'll be sad to know, has largely gone. We are now a well-adjusted, sober, law-abiding profession, trying to earn an honest crust these days, as Lord Leveson must have realised over the last few years. Now, actually, the section I wanted to share with you from the book is not that one, although I hope you liked it. It comes under a different section, which is K is for knives. Now, the chapter is ostensibly about the so-called knife crime epidemic that preoccupied Fleet Street's finest in 2008. But what it's really about is the way news works. So I thought I'd read a little extract. So this is like sort of, I've been in this business, 30 years, a bit more. God, I've been in this business 35 years. Anyway, but this is just, hopefully it won't lead you to despair. On my first day as a cub reporter on my local newspaper in the late 1970s, I held the naive view that the press was there to oil the wheels of our precious democracy. With my humble pen, I would expose falsehood, prick pomposity, and counter ignorance. I was a force for truth, power to the people. 30 years later, I strive to tell the truth. But I do so with the knowledge that daily news is a commodity, just like pork bellies, coffee beans, or silicon chips. It is manufactured to be marketed, traded, bought, and sold. Of course, knowledge of contemporary affairs is a force for good, but I'm not so green as to imagine that the news industry is always governed by principle ahead of profit. Globalization and consumerism has transformed the newsroom in the same way it has the high street. Just as I can now buy a soda or a sofa at 3 in the morning pretty much anywhere in the developed world, I can also get my fix of headlines. Staying ahead is thought to rest on staying in touch, as if to avert one's eyes from the 24-hour news channels for more than a few moments would see competitors race past you. Vast news hypermarkets churn out stories around the clock, some of their output little more than cut-and-paste rehashes, but sold with the thin promise that customers will know what is going on. Demand for high-quality news massively outstrips supply, and outlets constantly struggle to fill the shelves. There isn't always enough important stuff happening to keep the presses continuously rolling, and so the vacuum has been filled by thousands more news production lines, story factories run chiefly by those who wish to influence the news agenda for their own advantage. This is not necessarily as sinister as it may sound. A charities media team will work tirelessly to compile a news story in order to highlight their cause. A pressure group researches and writes a report to promote an issue close to its heart. But in Britain, the most powerful and influential of all the manufacturers are to be found in a small patch of London SW1. Indeed, a great deal of what we think of as news reflects the particular and current interests of those inhabiting the Westminster bubble, the politicians, lobbyists, and journalists who ply their trade around Parliament. Political salience dictates what is important. In the crowded middle ground where British politics is now conducted, arcane differences become front-page headlines, with the elbow jostling of the parties turned into a narrative of accusation and rebuttal, spin and smear. Weaknesses must be exploited. Attacks must be neutralized. In such a fevered environment, there may be little time for sober reflection. When this happens, reality can easily get drowned out by the thunderous rattle of the Westminster story machine. Whisper it not, but our democracy sometimes manufactures myths. This is the tale of one such fable, the knife crime epidemic that never was. Okay, that's K is for Knives, available in all good bookshops as of the Thursday. If you want to find out what happens. Now, I really don't want you to go away thinking that Easton has turned into a sort of cynical, washed-up old hack bemoaning the state of the world. That's not my point. But I do think, actually, we should think hard about the point of being a journalist. And I'm really genuinely gratified to hear some quite noble ambitions from the comments we heard from the floor. For me, journalism is about seeking out and telling the truth. Most of the time, however, telling the truth is likely to make you rather unpopular. You will be under pressure to beat up a story, to avoid the facts that get in the way of the headline, to select the bits that play to the prejudices and preconceived worldview of your readers, your listeners, or your viewers. Now, in my book, N is for numbers. That's about the relationship between politics and science, and to a degree, the responsibility of journalists ensuring that the facts absolutely do get in the way of a good story. That's the responsibility. Let me read you another little bit. I promise I won't do this. Is the last one. You'll be thrilled to hear. But N is for numbers. So, I witnessed a game being played at the Home Office when the crime figures were published. Journalists would be invited to a lock-in at the department, quite literally. The press would be ushered into a windowless room and instructed to turn off all telephones. The doors would be shut as a news release was thrust into our hands, proclaiming the good news of falling crime and delighted ministers. Then the assembled hacks would thumb through the official stats, searching for what they regarded as the real story. Buried in the pages of numbers and charts would be some narrow category of crime which was still increasing, evidence that equated with voters' settled view. Crime was out of control and politicians were deceitful toads. Upon being freed from our enforced purdah, that is the story we would tell. The more ministers struggled to convince the public that overall crime was falling, the less the electorate trusted them. In seeking to spin the numbers, they destroyed the reputation of government statistics and themselves. What was particularly galling for both politicians and statisticians in the Home Office was that the figures really did show that crime was falling, quite a lot, and in almost every category. I can't tell you how irritating it is for news editors to see Easton hoving into view, to tell them that their headline about a huge increase in muggings is nonsense. It often goes against every journalistic instinct in their body. I remember a classic example when figures from the British Crime Survey suggested a 46% increase in street robberies at knife point. Scary stuff. Now, the BCS interviews 50,000 people and asks them about their personal experiences of crime, providing not perfect, but easily the best assessment we have of crime trends. So it's not police figures, which can be massaged depending on how police record them. This is actually asking people about their experiences of crime, and we can see over time what has happened. When I looked at the data, it showed indeed that there had been a 54% increase in street robberies at knife point. But actually, this is a pretty unusual crime. The actual real numbers of people who had fallen victim to it in that 50,000 had risen from 45 to 84. 39 extra people out of all those 50,000 amounted to a 54% increase. Now, statistically, if a percentage increase is larger than the actual number increase, frankly, you're probably in a bit of a risky area. And sure enough, the BCS came with a big warning on the bottom which said that the 54% rise was not statistically significant. When I told the editor this and explained that perhaps a more accurate interpretation of the data was to say that nothing had really changed, he looked at me aghast and said, well, it may not be significant to you, mate, but it's sure as hell significant to all those people who've been held at bloody knife point. So, pretty unhelpful of me. But in many ways, I think the public actually really appreciate being given the facts rather than spin, even if it goes against the received wisdom. Myth-busting, I think, is actually a vital part of the job. And in these days of fact check and reality check and straight statistics, I don't know if you know any of these websites and organisations, online resources, often using social media to correct the assertions of lazy journalists, I actually think truth is making a bit of a comeback. So, why be a journalist? We need bright, talented, curious, and dogged individuals who can hold up a mirror to our society and show us an accurate picture, warts and all. People who can dig around and identify iniquity and unfairness, and who can hold up the glorious and the exceptional. We need people who are not beholden to a headline for a headline's sake, but who know that legitimacy and respect for journalists, which is somewhere down there at the moment, are built on storytelling founded on truth. So I applaud you for saying that's why you're going into journalism, but don't think that if you go in with those principles, it's going to be easy. It's going to be bloody hard, because the whole business is founded on, and I'm sure you've had it in your lessons, how do we turn a boring bit of business into something that might make a good story? So that's really all I wanted to say at this point. I'm delighted to take some questions. But just, you know, my big message to you all is actually journalism is about being a bit unpopular sometimes, even with other journalists. Thanks very much. Good. Are there any rude ones in there? Good. All right, listen, I'm delighted. We've got plenty of time, so I can take lots of questions from anybody. I'll talk about anything. If you want to talk about truth and honesty and deception and statistics and whatever you like, I'm happy to answer it, or anything you want, basically. So I think we're going to try and wait for the microphone to come around. There's a sort of nest of people over there we could start with, and then we'll go from there.
What are your thoughts regarding the Leveson inquiry?
I thought this might come up. I think journalism's got itself into quite a bad place in many ways. I think that legitimacy, people have to believe what we say, or there's really no point in saying it. But they have to think that in the end we're decent enough. I mean, journalists have never been hugely popular because often we say things that are, you know, difficult for people to take or are distressing or whatever. But in the end, they have to kind of believe that we're in the right place. So I think it is time for a shake-up, but I'm really anxious that what we don't do is get rid of a free press because we're worried about those people who take that freedom too far. People who think they're above the law rather than being able to operate alongside the law sometimes. And I think the law thing, which is maybe the central question behind those. I'll take a vote now. How many people in this room think that it is okay for a journalist to break the law in pursuit of a story? Hands up. Okay. There should be growing numbers. Well, look, I have to say, I absolutely agree with all those people who put their hands up. Of course, there are going to be times when journalists do need, frankly, to break the law. You look at the MP's expenses scandal, for instance, it involved a journalist accepting effectively stolen goods. That was the way that story was going to happen. As soon as you apply straight rules of the law on journalists, fancy pants lawyers are going to find a way to prevent journalists from getting to the truth. That's how it works. When people talk about things like, well, we must define the public interest, disaster. If we define the public interest, as soon as we do that, fancy pants lawyers will be in there demonstrating, oh, you are going to have an injunction against this story because it doesn't apply to the definition of the public interest as laid down in statute. So we have to be really careful about all of this, because in the end, journalists, I believe, must be able to occasionally to break the law. I've broken certainly the civil law. I've trespassed on people's properties. Actually, I tell you, there's an absolutely fantastic story I did not far from here a few years ago. You know that big NHS centre? It's up on the hill. What's the name of that place?
Quarry House.
Yeah, Quarry House, right. So when Quarry House was first opening, I just started on a programme which, in fact, the programme hadn't even begun. We were doing pilots for a programme called Here and Now. It was a sort of current affairs show on BBC One, which was later presented by Sue Lawley. But in the first series, it was just a load of journalists producing 6-minute films about Britain. And so we decided to go and do something about Quarry House. So I went into Quarry House. I somehow blagged my way in. I think with the help of a trades unionist, I got past the first bit of security, and then I got my secret camera out, and I went to the loo, and I put my secret camera on, and I wandered around, and it was a fantastic story because they'd got these carpets. Actually, you'd appreciate this story. They had carpets in Quarry House that were so deep that wheelchairs couldn't go through them. It's actually a fantastic story. So we did this, and we did loads of pictures of the, they had some wonderful oil paintings on the wall. Anyway, it was a sort of classic story about, sort of people, probably slightly unfair actually looking back at it now, but it was basically about how they spent a fortune dolling up this new place. And we did that. But technically, I had deception in getting into the place. I had obviously been, as somebody who was not properly there, I effectively trespassing on Crown land or whatever it turns out to be. So probably, but should I have not done that? Because we would never have known about the carpet so deep that wheelchairs couldn't get through them if I hadn't done that. So I think yes, we do have to break the law. So what's the answer? How are we going to get round this difficulty? Well, we don't want journalists to be above the law, where they can just feel they can do whatever they like. They can, pay off whoever, they can hack phones, they can behave as badly as they wish. And I look to what we do at the BBC, which is we have an incredibly strict editorial code on what we are allowed to do. Now, it doesn't say I can't break the law. But what it does say is that I have to go through a body at the BBC and say, look, this is what I'm planning to do, and this is why. And if I, as indeed I did with that story, which was for the BBC, that Quarry House, what we had to do was say, effectively, secret filming. We put a big sign up saying secret filming when we put that footage out. And the reason for that, in part, is to say, look, we broke the rules a bit here, guys. We went in there without permission and took these pictures. And I think if when challenged, journalists can say, this is what we did. These are the rules that we broke. Even if it's a much more serious rule than the one I broke. Maybe it's breaking into someone's house in order to get, I don't know, a key document, or, I don't know, I mean, one can make up any scenario. But if at the end of the day you feel you can justify publicly what you've done in terms of breaking the law because of genuinely the public import and interest of the story that you're telling, then I think that has got to be the way it works. Because as soon as you start nailing down as soon as you start having statutory codes, statutory definitions of the public interest, rules that say that I mean, journalists, I don't think, journalists should be prosecuted. Frankly, if journalists break the law, they should be prosecuted. But I think that there should be a defence, which is that what they were doing was in the public interest, and they can argue it in court. So that would be I mean, we're a long way from that. I don't suppose we're going to get to it. But that would be my sort of direction of travel. I do think we have to be nervous, but I do think there's a lot to be sorted out. And I do think that actually it can be done. And funnily enough, having worked in both print and in broadcasting, I think that broadcasting codes, and the BBC's is as good as any, are probably a pretty good model for us to follow. Yeah, I'll take another question. Yeah, next year I'll come over next.
What's the biggest story that you've covered?
I've covered lots of sort of, big stories. I've interviewed Nelson Mandela and, I've broken stories about politics and all kinds of things. But for me, the stories that I'm most proud of in terms of both the impact that they've had and the fact that it was original, dogged journalism, probably two stories that I think I would pick. One was, and you have to imagine, this is before the age of the Microsoft network. Okay, so we're talking very early days of computers. It was 1997, I think, and there was a lot of discussion. It must have been earlier than that. Sorry, no, we're talking 1994 or even 3. And what this was there'd been a lot of chat about quangos. Do you know what a quango is? It's a non-governmental body at arm's length of government. And whether or not they were being populated with government stooges, basically. And it was impossible to tell, because if you asked the government, tell us all the people on all the quangos who are a member of the Tory party, they would say it's far too expensive for us to do that. We can't do that. So I thought, well, what they can't do is say who is on this particular public body. Who are the members of this particular public body? And so I started asking a lot of questions, both with friendly MPs in Parliament, laying down questions, and my own inquiries to government departments. We got a list of all the non-governmental organisations. We went through it took months and months. Eventually we got a huge list of all the names of all the people on all the non-governmental organisations that we could find, right? And this is data, so now looking at bits of paper, okay, this high. Right? What do we do then? Well, this was the very early days of computers. And we didn't have any computers in the office to speak of, really. We had typewriters. So, or early computers we had. We certainly couldn't do anything with them. We couldn't start searching data. So we hired a chap down in Bournemouth, who I'm told was a rather smelly fat bloke. But anyway, that's all I know about him. But he took delivery of all these huge piles of paper with all the names of all the people on all the quangos in the whole country. And he literally spent his time inputting them for us into an enormous, well, now it'd be straightforward. Now it would just be, cut and paste into an Excel file. But in those days, I had to do each name. It's incredibly time consuming. We used to send the papers off, and a fortnight later, we'd get the latest disc back, okay, from him. And eventually, we got all the names inputted, and then we cross-referenced all the names on all the quangos with things that were available to us, sometimes even in electronic form, which was like all members of Parliament, all their spouses, all the members of the Tory party and Labour Party and Liberal Democrat and other parties' executives and so on. So we had this enormous kind of, two enormous files, all the quango people, all the people from the political parties and so on. And then we tied the two together. And it was a fantastic story. We discovered that there were 27 spouses, wives and husbands of Tory MPs or peers on quangos in Britain. 27. Out of all the other parties, there was just one. A very, very academic woman who's now in the House of Lords who happens to be a member of the Labour Party. That who happened to be married to a Labour MP at the time. That was it. So we had a fantastic story there. We also brilliantly discovered that there was one person, a rather charming old Tory from Wales, who was on so many quangos and being paid for them
that he actually would have had to have worked 8 days a week in order to fulfill all his functions. So we made the front page splash on loads of papers. I've still got the copy of the Daily Star, which was a bit more of a paper then than it was today, which splashed on that story. So that would be one of them. And the other story, and I don't want you to think I'm just a sort of data wonk, although I think data is a fantastic source of stories, was again a similar sort of tale, which was basically about judges. And I did this for Dispatches, the documentary series on Channel 4, a few years ago now, so it's been probably about 2001. And this was that we went to the Court of Appeal, and they had just, for about 5 or 6 years, had started keeping digital computerized records of all the appeal cases. And we managed to get, which was used by lawyers, and we managed to get a kind of login, a lawyer's login, to go and have a look at the appeal court cases. Well, of course, what I was able to do for the first time was actually see which judge it was who had been successfully appealed, either in terms that his sentence was normally too long, sometimes too short, or where he'd screwed up the court case so much that the case had been chucked out. So it was one of the most exciting things, because we were just building up over time. And again, it took forever, I have to say. We had to do it all ourselves, typing it all in. My wife thought I was just completely mental, spending till 2 or 3 in the morning, literally typing all these cases in a big Excel sheet, basically. And then we discovered some extraordinary stories. The judge in Leeds, I don't think he still sits here, but a judge in Leeds, Manchester, was in Manchester, who was appealed against sentence for being too strict on his sentence successfully twice every week. He was just doing it every week. He was just sentencing people. The crowds loved it. I'm sure in the gallery they were going, "Hey, that's brilliant, send him down." But every time it was going to the Court of Appeal and being reduced on appeal because it was out of line. Then we also found a very nice judge in Kent who had been very unusual. The Attorney General actually has to decide if someone has been sentenced too leniently. This bloke, it happens probably only about 10 times a year, something like that. This particular one judge had been done 3 times on the basis of this, for 2 lenient sentences. So we were able to identify him. And we were also able to identify a judge who on 3 separate occasions in rape trials had managed to so screw up the case that the whole trial had collapsed and the case had to be reheard. You imagine the awful trauma for the victim in that case of that one judge, 3 crack trials. For the first time ever, and I've heard since that the judiciary were petrified at me doing this story, because for the first time ever, judges were being held to account. And when I spoke to Charlie Faulkner, who was a good friend of mine before and after, but not when he was Lord Chancellor, when we found ourselves on other sides of the divide, I wanted to interview the Lord Chancellor about my programme, and he would not come on the programme. And that for me, I suppose, quite a long answer to what was a very short question, but 2 stories which I hope in their own way give you an idea of where brilliant stories come from. Often it is just saying, I know it's in here somewhere, and it's a hell of a lot of work, weeks or months of work, but when you get it, I remember when we did the minister on the Quango story, I went and saw him in the cabinet office, junior Tory minister, and I started the interview and I said, we have discovered that there is that your party has effectively been stuffing Quangos, and we produced huge amounts of data evidence which I presented to him. And he said, well, you can't have done it. He said, well, you can't have that evidence. I said, but we have. He said, no, I'm sorry, it's impossible because you can't get all the data. I said, but I've got it. I've got the data. No, I'm sorry, I refuse. This is silly. I'm not prepared to do an interview. This is just silly. So the only clip we had of the government minister was just him going, it's silly, you can't have the evidence. And that was that. Anyway, so long story, I hope it was interesting. Yes, gentleman down the front. You just wait for the microphone if you would. Someone pass that. Would you like to take it down? We can do this ourselves. Just the last person who has it has to take it on to the next one.
Do
Do you believe that the Press Complaints Commission are a toothless watchdog?
Yes. Yes, I do. I do. I think we need something much tougher. We need something that's not just an old boys' club for newspaper editors to sit on, and we just need something. We just need something with a bit more cojones, really. Who's prepared to take on the biggest newspaper editor in Fleet Street if necessary, and give them a good kicking, and kicking where it hurts. Otherwise, it's not really doing its job. And I don't want to have a statutory body. I don't want to have some government-picked committee. I don't even want some statutorily enshrined committee of the great and the good. But I do want our industry, my industry, to find better ways of making sure that people, don't spoil it for everybody else. There's some question over there. June, you had a question.
Can I ask one first?
Yes, no, sorry, of course you can.
I'll be very quick. I'm actually a lecturer here.
Right.
And just on the question before last, I just thought it was a fantastic illustration of that sort of looking at stats and data, and there's something buried in there, And I'm just wondering, as an educator in this field, do you think there's a case for having, say, a module or two on a journalism degree on handling data, reading
God,
stats,
if you don't do it,
reading basic accounts?
Statistics are where it's at. Okay, that's where the stories are. If you don't understand statistics, go and find out about them. Okay, because that will tell you when they're talking bollocks, and it will tell. What's happened up there? Will I ever get my answer to my question? Okay. Who was that? Did you not ask? I thought you did ask it. Oh, that was some time ago. Oh, look, we're rushing through that. Okay. All right. Statistics. Statistics, I'm sorry. Going back to my book, N is for numbers. And the reason I did N is for numbers, because I actually think that not only is it is just so critically important. If we want to understand what truth is, you were talking about truth, we have to base it on something. We can't just base it on on the front page of the Daily Mail. We can't base it on the words that come out of some minister's mouth or some chief executive of a big company. In the end, we have to have something solid. We have to go back to the numbers. We have to go to science. That's not to say statistics are always perfect, but you need to understand how they work. You need to know how to do an Excel sheet. You need to know how to interrogate government data so that you can see the stories that are hidden away in there. We've just actually, Kojo, the BBC's College of Journalism, has just started a whole module on statistics, which I think will be available online. You'll be able to. Are you all aware of the College of Journalism website? Do you use it? Well, I think that I've just been interviewed for this, so I'm pretty confident there is a statistics module coming up on that. I would, even if you have to do it in your own time, I would really, if you don't know already, I really impress upon you, actually, if you know how to interrogate a bunch of government stats, you will find loads and loads of stories. If you're a regional journalist and you want to know how is my region faring in this particular area, the health department's just published. Actually, even more interesting, of course, this current government, right, has talked about accountability being the great new thing. And the answer to accountability is going to be huge amounts of data. Every transaction that costs more than, whatever, 200 quid or 50 quid or something that any government department or local authority makes, now they have to report it and put it out there. And we're all supposed to read this stuff and then deal with waste and corruption and pettifogging and all the rest of it. But the truth is that data will just sit there gathering dust because it's almost impossible to identify. You need to really be very smart to know how to use that data to find out if there's a real story in there. But there are real stories in there. There are lots of real stories in there, not just about corruption and waste, but about actually how your local authority compares with others, where the priorities vary. It's just Story Central is going to be on an Excel file, I promise you. Just that they are the very best and the most important stories. And if you've got if you're one of those people that likes sitting down at home and thinking, well, just have a little fiddle with this for an hour or so, and you dig up something from the Department of Work and Pensions or the CLG, crikey, look at that. Leeds is the absolute rock bottom in this. Why the hell is that? What is going on? You'll find stories. So, absolutely, yes, statistics. If it's not in there, it should be. Mike. Yeah, there's somebody over here, I think.
Oh, can I just add on
Yes.
that? BBC Radio 4 does a great programme on statistics, more or less. So I'd recommend all journalism students listen to that.
Is there somebody over there? I don't know. There seems to be sort of vague hand. Yeah, that. We need more emphatic hand waving. If you've got a question, wave. That was sort of slightly maybe I got a question.
Hiya. Do you think it's easier for the BBC to be fairer, more balanced and accurate, because you're not like pressured to advertisers and like whereas newspapers are more open to pressures from financial incomes and that, whereas you're guaranteed licence fee.
Okay. I don't know about easier. I mean, I think broadcasting and print are different creatures in this. I mean, broadcasting, we have legislation which means that we have to be impartial, we have to be fair and balanced. So whether you're Channel 4, ITV, Sky or us, you are obliged under the legislation to provide a fair and balanced coverage and impartial. And that is a fantastic obligation on us, frankly, because it doesn't stop us doing fantastic journalism, brilliant investigations. It doesn't stop us holding people to account. It's not as simple as, on the one hand, on the other, time will tell. It still allows you to get in there and do proper stories. But we do have those rules. Now, newspapers, so it's not about advertising in that sense, because Channel 4 News has the same. I work for Channel 4 News, I work for Channel 5 News. Both those organisations have the same broad rules on impartiality and balance, and to be fair, I think that they, for the most part, are exactly that. You only have to turn on Fox News to know what news that's not like that looks like. Newspapers, though, it's a different game, and yes, it's partly about advertisers, it's partly about circulation. It's actually a slightly different game, and it's not one that I particularly want to be part of, in as much as I've heard a lot of people, including Mr. Dacre at Leveson, and many journalists talking about how they see their job is to tell their readers what they want to hear. Now, that's fine, and it sells newspapers, and that's what they do. But to my mind, that's not what I went into journalism to do. Actually, I think sometimes it is about telling people things that they don't want to hear. So I suspect for the newspapers, and they all have their own audience, whether you're the Guardian or the Mail, you all have your own audiences to whom you're trying to appeal, and you sort of tailor the way stories are written in a manner that you think is going to appeal to them. I don't think it's about advertisers so much. I mean, it might be at local level, perhaps. I mean, I don't know enough, but I think it's more about just a sort of principled approach to what you're actually doing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Another question. Yeah, lady up the back.
Hi there. Firstly, I'd like to say that you're very interesting, and I just wanted to find out. Earlier, you mentioned that journalists can break the law. How far have you gone with this breaking the law?
Me personally, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, everything. No, I think taking pictures of a wheelchair-proof carpet is just as far as you. I mean, I've not really needed to be honest. I mean, I think most of the time, 99.9% of the time, we can get fantastically good stories without breaking the law. I'm just saying that there has got to be room, just sometimes, when the story is important enough for journalists to be able to say, do you know what? We'll break the law and we'll take the consequences. But it is the second part of that I think is important. That if you do break the law, you have to take the consequences. And I would like to see a recognition within the criminal statute that, perhaps not a total defence, but a partial defence against criminal sanction, that you were a journalist and you were doing something because actually what you were doing was in the greater public interest. I'm afraid I can't give you some juicy bit of scandal about Mark Easton having done some awful thing. As far as I'm aware, I've not broken the criminal law in pursuit of stories. Yep, another question. We'll go over this side of that.
what do you think the future holds for the profession?
Well, the key, the really big change, obviously, is social media, online, ubiquity of material. Huge challenges, certainly for print media. I personally don't think newspapers will die, but I think that they will become the actual business of a newspaper will change. And most of the stuff that your generation and your children's generation will use will be via a screen or a tab. I can't even imagine it's going to be like. I mean, I don't know. Do you read the Times or the Guardian on an iPad? I mean, it's a fantastic experience. Right? It's so wonderful, and being able to link through, I think that's so great. So for newspapers, I think there are huge challenges. Just as an aside, something that I was talking about the other day, local papers, and this is critically important right now. I was talking to a chap called Lord Wasserman, who is a government advisor, or was a government advisor, certainly on the introduction of police and crime commissioners. Are you aware of police and crime commissioners? This November, you will be voting on who you want to be in charge of your local police force. And so there'll be an election. And there are concerns, some of which I also hold, about whether or not actually these commissioners will be able to be held to account. Will they just go for votes rather than looking after the interests of the whole population? And Lord Wasserman said to me, actually, I have enormous faith in the media. And I said, well, that's nice to hear, but do you seriously believe that local newspapers are going to be able to hold police and crime commissioners to account? Oh yes, absolutely believe that. And local television, and micro television. And I have to say, I think he's on another bloody planet. The truth is, local newspapers have been rubbish at holding local democracy to account for a long time. When I joined the Southern Evening Echo, as I was describing earlier, in the late 70s, even then, the Southern Evening Echo made its money from small ads. Didn't make it from the news. And people bought the paper for the small ads. They didn't buy it for the news. It was like a sort of bit of a joke, really. You know, it's almost, yes, it's important that it exists, but the idea that newspapers are driven by news, that's really what they're about. No, they're driven by advertising, and they always have been. And the real problem for them, of course, is that the arrival of being able to buy and sell online means that the small ad is disappearing. You know, so the whole funding model for local newspapers is in deep trouble. But you know, I think local democracy has to survive, has to find new ways of doing it, and I think it probably will. National media, you know, it's so difficult to know where we're going to go with all of this. I think in a lot of ways it's good. You know, I was talking earlier about straight statistics and fact check and all these other, you know, actually out there it's both mad and maddening, but it's also brilliant. You know, I mean, if you don't as journalist students, if you're not out there now writing constantly, you know, with your own blog and doing your articles and shoving out your tweets and doing, if you're not doing it, what the hell are you doing? You know, you should be doing it. This is where it's all happening. You know, that's if you want to know how to get a job, you know, you just need to be out there writing brilliant things and shoving them up on the internet and trying to find ways of flogging them to people, getting people interested in them. You know, really work hard at that, because that's where the future's going to be. That's how people are going to make their careers. And you know, so that's clearly going to be huge. Future broadcasting. I think I'm reasonably confident that in the end, people are still going to want what I call a stick in the sand. Okay. So if you imagine that the world is getting busier and busier, there's more and more stuff swirling around, so many stories and tweets and emails and blogs and everything. People's heads are spinning. You know, the 24-hour cycle and all of that. They still want somebody else, because they haven't got time in their busy lives, somebody else to put a big stick into the shifting sands that they can hold on to. And I think that's what the BBC does, and what ITN does, and some newspapers actually too. Put a stick in there so that when when everything else just seems to be going, I just want to know what the hell's going on, you can go to a place, and it probably will be online as much as it is, on your telly or on a piece of paper or on the radio. But actually, people will still want to go to that. So I think that journalism, quality journalism, I was perhaps being rather cynical in my book, but there are these cheap news factories, and actually people know that they're pretty rubbish. And they still want something that they can believe in, something that they genuinely believe has got quality, that's got a kite mark. So yeah, I'm optimistic. Yeah, take a question from you and then come to just chat with them.
Thank you. During the Leveson inquiry, a thing that's sort of come to light and been highlighted quite regularly is privacy. If you were to draw a line as to where the privacy should be, where would you draw it, and why would you draw it there?
Privacy. Perhaps unusually, I think we've got the privacy balance a bit wrong in this country. I genuinely think that sometimes journalists are too often, I think we do just shove stuff out because it's interesting to the public under the cover of something that we claim is the public interest, and that actually people do have a right to a family life. They do have the right to make mistakes in their life without being destroyed in the public sphere. And I really worry that our unforgiving sort of the firestorm that anybody has to endure if they make any kind of mistake in private, career destroying, life destroying environment in which they live. And what that's done is created, I think, a really expensive, unfortunate environment for all of us. We worry about spin doctors. We worry about corporate lawyers. We worry about health and safety. We worry about all these PR people who are sort of protecting the rich. But all that's grown up as much as a response to a world in which one tiny mistake, it could happen to any of us. I mean, it could happen to any of you. You tweet something stupid, or you email something to someone and it's the wrong. It can happen. Or someone takes a photograph of you and before you know it, you're on YouTube. And actually, that can be the end. That can, these days, be the end of it. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that in the days of, sort of the free environment of the internet, that we can guarantee to protect people's privacy in quite the way that we once did, and people in the end have to just take what's coming to a certain extent. But I do think that we have to think quite hard about the almost ritual, mob-like destruction of people in public life who make mistakes in their private lives, and therefore, where would I draw the line? I don't think you can ever draw a line. I was saying earlier, as soon as you do draw a line, then it means you can, some lawyer will come along and say you've crossed that particular line. But I do think we just need to think quite carefully, because actually it's quite damaging to our society that we spend so much time and effort protecting reputation and protecting corporate bodies and institutional bodies, because we've created an environment to sort of, this is probably not the answer you were expecting, but anyway, we created such a red-hot environment in our public sphere. So, yeah, I think we have got it a bit wrong. I don't quite know how we get from here to where I want to be, but I do think we need to, certainly in our public conversation, national conversation, we need to think really hard about actually where we think that line should be, and maybe in the course of having that conversation, we'll find ourselves in a better place. Okay, gentleman in front of you. There, to your other side. Sneak up that way.
Thanks. The comment about whiskey met with a lot of enthusiasm on Twitter. A lot of people really excited, but isn't it worth pointing out that that's really a slippery slope down to where Alistair Campbell ended up?
Yeah, no, well, I don't think it's true now. And in fact, what the chapter in my book goes on to say is that this, now the liquid lunch is pretty much dead. I mean, certainly when I arrived in Fleet Street, I would have thought nothing about going to the pub at lunchtime and having 2 or 3 pints of beer and then going back and recording voice pieces for the radio on that night's tea time bulletins. But everyone did it. It was just rolling, but thank God, I very, very rarely drink at lunchtime at all now. Partly because I'd fall asleep if I did, but the liquid lunch has gone. People now tend to have lunch in front of their computers. And it's partly because Fleet Street has dispersed, so that's changed. I think there's also just a much more sort of professional, business-like attitude among many of the organisations. We can't have this anymore. It was out of control, of course, there's still people who behave badly, and our industry is full of some pretty extraordinary characters. But if any of you are thinking that journalism in the 21st century is about huge amounts of alcohol, that's certainly not what I'm saying. I'm saying it was, and the wreckage of that was all over the place. But these days, I think it is actually, for the most part, a very professional, focused